In this Golf Smart Insight, we're going to investigate alpha torque. So I had a question posed to me actually a couple months ago, but I've gotten around to kind of organizing my thoughts and wanted to share it now. But I got a question a couple months ago about alpha torque, right? Like there's these alpha graphs that are popping up on forums and blogs, and they can be a little confusing. So I thought I would do a video to help explain A, what is alpha, why is it significant? B, what would you expect to see? Just kind of thinking through it logically. And then C, what are some of the controversies? Like why has this become kind of a big deal in debate between a couple different camps? So first, let's define what is alpha. So alpha classically has been defined as in-plane torque or in-plane force. So if I take my hula hoop here, we'll pretend that this is the functional swing plane. Anything that moves the club in the plane of motion is going to be alpha. Now it can be an alpha force where I'm kind of moving the whole shaft as a unit, or it could be a torque where I'm creating some rotation. But anything where I'm moving in the plane of motion is going to be alpha. We can compare that to what they call beta, which would be kind of slicing through the swing plane, anything like this, or gamma, which would be rotating within the swing plane. So alpha is the in-plane movement. Now, why is alpha special? Or why is it significant and why should we study it? Well, one researcher has shown that the magnitude of alpha force during the downswing has a 0.94 correlation with clubhead speed. And clubhead speed has a huge correlation with ball speed. So basically, if you want to hit it further, you have to apply more alpha torque. Now, that by itself doesn't really give you a whole lot to go on, but it does tell us that this is probably an interesting parameter that we should continue to study. So then, we know alpha is in-plane movement, or at least that's how it's been classically defined. What should we expect to see? Well, when we have all these changes and we have these three different planes of movement and rotation, things can get a little complicated. So let's use a linear example to try to explain and understand what we might expect to see looking at an alpha torque graph. So instead of having torques, we're just going to have forces because we're going to do a linear model here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this back, and then I'm basically going to pretend I was like throwing a javelin, right? So it's going to go back and then go like this, and I'm going to try to do it with a little bit of speed. Okay, we can see the similarities between a golf swing where I would pull it back and then try to create a bunch of speed and then have to slow it down. So we can see how the model will work for this linear, and then we can extrapolate what we can for the rotations. All right, so right now this thing is just hanging out in space, and it's not going to move unless I apply a force to it. So I'm going to apply a negative force, which would be in this backswing direction. Now if I only applied this negative force, this thing would move infinitely in that direction, and it would basically run through walls and whatever. I need to apply a positive a positive force in that direction in order to stop it from moving that way. So I apply a force this way, somewhere around here, I shift, and now I'm applying a force in that direction to help slow it down. I'm going to continue applying a force in that direction until I reach maximum, and then now I'm going to be applying a force away in order to decelerate it. So it would be negative, positive, 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 negative. Something like that is what we would expect to see when we're looking at this alpha torque. Because basically what we would see with the golf swing is we should see a negative movement to help start the club moving. Then somewhere up around here, I'm going to have to start applying a positive torque to prevent the club from continuing its backswing direction. If I continued to apply a negative torque, then the club would continue moving in that backswing direction and basically speed up as it approached the ground. So I'm going to apply a positive to slow it down, and then I'm going to keep applying positive until I get to around this waist height position. And we'll talk about that in a second, but I'm going to keep applying positive until I get to somewhere around here. The club head speed and the positive movement of the club is going to continue all the way to impact, and then it's going to basically go to 0 at impact, and then I'm now going to apply that negative torque to slow the club down safely as I make it my way into the finish. That's what we would expect to see. Now, why would we expect to see it go from positive to negative somewhere around shaft parallel? Well, what'll happen is I get this club moving fast and somewhat aggressively, and it gets to a point where I can no longer add speed to the system. And me trying to add speed potentially could slow it down, potentially could mess up my geometry, affect my low point, affect my consistency. But the big thing is it could potentially cause me to put myself in a position where I might injure myself, and for no added speed benefit. The example that is frequently used is if I'm riding a bike downhill, right? So I'm riding a bike downhill and I get to a point where the pedals are moving so fast that I can't pump any faster. It's just already going. In fact, if my feet were actually clipped into the bike, you can imagine getting to a point where my body is actually going to slow down what the bike would be capable of doing on its own. And that's pretty much what happens when I get to about shaft parallel, is I'm going to more or less focus on just directing that energy. I can't really add anything more with that trail hand. So that's why we would expect to see a very similar pattern to this. We would expect to see the club accelerating all the way until impact and then rapidly decelerating. In fact, the torque will be 0 or really close to 0 at impact to allow me to safely decelerate it in the backswing or in the follow through. So now what is the controversy with alpha, right? Well, there's a number of researchers looking at it, Dr. Kwan, Dr. McKenzie, Dr. Neal. They're all kind of seeing a similar pattern to what I've just demonstrated here. But then there's one commercial group, Jacobs 3D, and that one is being operated by golf pros, and they're showing some things that we would not typically expect to see with this alpha torque. So that's where the question came up. Specifically, there are 2 times where they're showing something differently. And basically what this is leading guys like me to think is either they've changed the definition of alpha, so they're measuring something different than alpha but calling it alpha, and alpha already has this kind of established definition of in-plane movement. So that's just a little confusing. Or they're calling it in-plane movement and they're just measuring it differently, and they have to explain why. Well, it would help if they would explain why they chose these differences, since the pure mechanics don't match up with what they're saying. For example, there are 2 major times that I've seen graphs or quivers or whatever that cause a little bit of confusion. One would be at the top where they say that it should be applying a negative, I should be applying a negative torque at the top of the swing and into the downswing. And as I showed, if I was truly applying a negative torque, then it wouldn't be the end of the backswing because the club would continue moving in that direction. The other point in time is down near impact. So basically what they are saying and what they've shown is that you can apply positive alpha torque, so in the direction of the target after impact, which basically doesn't make sense. It's kind of like that downhill bike analogy where I get this thing to a point where I can no longer add speed, and now you're telling me I can add even more and more speed. It doesn't quite match up with what should be happening with the mechanics, and it would potentially put me in a position to injure myself in the follow-through. So that ultimately brings me to my conclusion for this video, which is basically helping you see the thought process that you should have as a critical thinker and a golfer. I don't think you should just rely exclusively on one person's opinion. Your goal should be to understand what's actually going on and how it applies to either you as the student or your students if you're a coach. So in this particular example, golf science can give us a lot of great information on how I'm pulling on the club, just like 3D kinematic data can show us positions or velocities and things that are very, very useful. Force plates can show me how my feet are working with the ground. Ball flight monitors can show me how the club and the ball are interacting. All that is useful data, but they are all perspectives on the global whole, which is a movement. So understanding how the body moves and how it creates the the golf swing will ultimately help you understand which of these new graphs or new pieces of information are going to be really helpful, and which pieces may be really neat to know, but not so practical on the range. I'm not saying this is either of those. I just want you to think about it from those perspectives. So if you have a question about something that gets brought up in any of the blogs or forums of the golf science world, and you'd like to have it clarified, either reach out to the researchers directly, because they've been great at answering my questions, or message me and I'll reach out to them and hopefully put together a video to help clarify what it is that's causing you problems. If you want to understand our philosophies on the golf swing and the pieces that build them, please check out our membership program at golfsmartacademy.com, or follow us and subscribe on YouTube to get more videos like this.